My name is Paige Mercer. I'm 33 years old, and I'm a hospice nurse in Chicago. 5 months before our wedding, my fiancé sat across from me at his marble kitchen island and told me two things in the same calm voice he used for ordering wine. His parents would not be at the wedding, and my mom and dad were never, under any circumstances, going to meet his family. He said it like a policy. So one Saturday morning, while he thought I was covering a shift, I drove almost 5 hours to a little yellow house in Saginaw, Michigan, with a stranger's name written on my hand. What I found inside that house was worse than anything I had let myself imagine. And what I did about it at our engagement party, in front of every important person he was trying to impress, is why I'm telling you this story. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where family secrets come into the light and quiet people finally find their voice. If stories about loyalty, betrayal, and hard-won dignity speak to you, you're in the right place. Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from today, and be sure to subscribe because you will not want to miss how this one ends. Let me tell you what hospice work teaches you, because it matters to this story. I have sat beside hundreds of people in their last days. They talk. Near the end, they ask for people. And in 12 years of nursing, I have never once heard a dying person call out for their business partner or their country club. They call for their mother, their son, a sister they haven't spoken to since some Christmas nobody can explain anymore. That's the whole list. I grew up in Rockford, Illinois, in a house that smelled like motor oil and coffee. My dad, Tom, turned wrenches at a machine shop for 35 years. My mom, Ruth, answered phones at the middle school and baked almond bars for every funeral and fundraiser in the county. We were never poor exactly, but we were the kind of family that knew what everything cost. And here's the part I'm not proud of. From about age 12, I appointed myself their manager. Before parent-teacher nights, I'd iron Dad's one good shirt and hide the ball cap with the engine grease on the brim. Before my college friends visited, I coached Mom out of telling her coupon stories, the ones where the whole plot is how much she saved. I called it helping. I told myself I was protecting them from rooms that would look down on them. It took me 20 years and one shoebox full of birthday cards to understand what I was actually rehearsing. My parents never once complained about it. Dad would just put on the ironed shirt, wink at me, and say, "Better?" And I'd feel something twist a little, somewhere under the ribs, and ignore it. I was good at ignoring it. Then I met a man who had taken that small, shameful habit of mine and built it into an entire life, with a budget and a script and a cast. Though, of course, I didn't know that yet. I met Grant Caldwell 5 years ago at a fundraiser for the hospice where I work. He was 31 then, a rising client director at a private wealth firm downtown, the kind of man whose shirts never wrinkle because they wouldn't dare. I watched him spend 20 minutes talking with one of my patients, a 90-year-old former school teacher in a wheelchair, and he never once glanced over her head at someone more important. That's rarer than you'd think. He remembered everything. My coffee order, my mother's birthday, the name of my first dog. He planned trips like a travel agent and apologized like a diplomat. My friends called him the catalog man, as in, where's the catalog you ordered him from? And I laughed, because when something looks that finished, you assume someone else did the quality control. There were quirks. He hated being photographed off guard. He kept no clutter, no souvenirs, no junk drawer, which in my family is practically a crime against nature. And in 5 years I never saw a single photograph of Grant as a child. Not one. No gap-toothed school picture, no awkward prom shot, nothing. When I asked, he told me there had been a house fire when he was in college, and the albums were gone, and his family wasn't sentimental anyway. He said the word sentimental the way some people say infected. I remember thinking that was sad. A man with no evidence of his own childhood. I'm a nurse. I read charts for a living, and a chart with pages missing usually means somebody removed them. I knew that. I want you to understand that I knew that, and I asked more than once, and every question landed on an answer so smooth and so complete that pushing further felt like an accusation. You try being the woman who demands receipts for a house fire. Still, quietly, I kept noticing, and the noticing kept adding up. Here is the family Grant gave me, the authorized version. His parents were Preston and Elaine Caldwell, retired art dealers, based in Naples, Florida, though based turned out to be a load-bearing word. According to Grant, they were cultured, difficult, and cold, the kind of people who send a card in December with no handwriting in it. He and his father were cordial but distant. Old money, old grudges, don't ask. And I had met them. That's the thing I keep coming back to. I met his parents twice, in the flesh, at big glittering events with 200 other guests. Preston had silver hair and a pocket square, and told a lovely polished story about Grant's graduation from Northwestern. Elaine wore pearls and smelled like a department store in the nicest way, and held my hands and called me a breath of fresh air. 20 minutes, both times, and then they were swept off to a flight, or a benefit, or a foundation dinner. When I suggested a private dinner, just the four of us, Grant said his mother didn't do well one-on-one, that she performed better with an audience, and I remember laughing at his word choice. Performed. When I offered to fly down to Naples with him before the wedding, he told me they'd just left for Marseille for the season. People like that actually say things like that, so I believed him the way you believe a weather report. I did the normal checks a woman does. I searched their names once, found a tasteful mention of a Caldwell art consultancy, and stopped. Because what was I looking for exactly? And what would it say about me if he caught me digging through his family like a claims adjuster? That's how good the wall was. Every door I tried was locked, painted to look like it had never been a door at all. And my parents, my actual warm-blooded parents, had never been in the same room with them even once. In March, with the wedding 5 months out, I finally pushed. Both families. One dinner, I said. Pick any restaurant, any city, I will handle everything. It's one evening, Grant. My mom has been asking me for a year. He agreed. The way he agreed to everything, warmly and instantly. And then the date slid. A client crisis. Then his parents' schedule. Then a conference. Then a vague digestive complaint of Elaine's that traveled with her like luggage. 3 cancellations in 6 weeks. Each one padded with flowers for my mother and a reservation somewhere nicer next time. My dad started calling it the dinner that lives in the future. And then one Tuesday night I came off a 12-hour shift still in scrubs and tried once more at the kitchen island, and Grant set down his glass and let something slip through the polish. He said, "Paige, drop it. They wouldn't know what to do in a room like that." I stood there holding a takeout container like it was a chart with bad news in it. I asked him, very quietly, what exactly he meant by they. He walked it back within seconds, smooth as ever. He meant the restaurant was stuffy. He meant his parents were snobs. He meant everyone would be more comfortable apart. He was tired. He was sorry. It was a beautiful apology. It had structure. It landed its points in order, like something written in advance for a wound he knew he'd eventually cause. My dad apologizes by standing in the doorway holding a wrench, saying, "Well, anyway. I know what a real one sounds like." That night I lay awake next to this perfect man doing math that had nothing to do with numbers. He didn't want my parents in that room. Fine. But then why, in 5 years, had his own parents never once been allowed in a small room either? Who exactly was being protected, and from whom? 2 weeks later he did it with the wine voice. That's what I call it now. That smooth pour of a voice he used for decisions that were already made. He came home, kissed my temple, and told me his parents would not be attending our wedding. His mother's health, he said. Crowds overwhelmed her. His father wouldn't come without her. They sent their love and a very generous check, and he said the word check as if it were a synonym for parents. I stood at the counter waiting to feel surprised and couldn't find it. What I felt instead was the floor tilting, gently, the way it does when a thing you've suspected puts on its coat and introduces itself. I asked if I could at least call his mother. He said she wasn't taking calls. I asked for her number anyway, and watched 1/2 second of stillness cross his face before he smiled and said he'd set something up after the honeymoon. Meanwhile, I had to tell my parents. Mom went quiet on the phone in the way that's worse than crying, and then she said the thing that put a crack straight down the middle of my ear. "Paige, you're marrying into a family I'm not allowed to look at. What did we do?" She thought it was them. Of course she thought it was them. She'd spent her whole life being gently managed out of nicer rooms, some of that management done by me, and I heard my own childhood coming out of the phone and had no answer for it. She stopped asking about centerpieces after that. She mailed back the seating chart with no note. My mother, who owns a 3-ring binder for other people's weddings, went quiet on mine. So I stopped asking Grant questions. Questions only fed the machine that made answers. I decided to start looking at my fiancé the way I look at a chart. And charts don't lie for you. I want to be honest about the trap I was standing in, because from the outside, people always ask why the woman doesn't just leave. Here is why. 4 months earlier, when everything still glowed, I had given up my apartment in Ravenswood, the little one-bedroom I'd kept through every stage of my adult life like a fire exit. My savings had gone to the wedding deposits. The venue alone was $11,000, in both our names. My dress was hanging in his closet, already fitted. My whole schedule, my commute, my mail, my retirement paperwork, all of it now routed through a glass tower in Lincoln Park with his name on the deed. I wasn't a guest in my life anymore. I was a tenant in his. And the man himself had not actually done anything you could hold up in the light and call cruelty. That's what I'd want you to sit with. He was kind to me daily. He rubbed my feet after doubles. If I had gone to my girlfriends with what I had, a canceled dinner, a slipped nickname, a missing photo album, they'd have told me every family has weather, and mine wasn't even raining. But I spend my working life with people who have run out of time to lie to themselves, and something in me had quietly moved to that side of the bed. I found myself watching my fiancé the way I watch a patient's breathing, counting things nobody else counts. Little pauses before answers about his childhood. The way his accent flattened. One careful notch. On calls with certain clients. The way he never, ever said the name of his high school. If you've ever stood in a room you helped pay for, wearing a smile you didn't feel, wondering who exactly you were about to promise your life to, then stay with me, because you already know this feeling in your spine. And 3 weeks later, on a dead quiet night shift, a television in a hospice family lounge broke my whole world open. Tell me in the comments if you've ever had a doubt you couldn't prove. And hit subscribe, because everything from here on out, I watched happen with my own eyes. First, the gala, because looking back, that was the dress rehearsal fate let me sit in on. In late April, Grant's firm threw its spring benefit at a hotel on Michigan Avenue, and to my surprise, his parents flew in for it. There they were by the ice sculpture, Preston in midnight blue, Elaine in pearls, both of them lit up like a store window. I watched my future in-laws work the room and felt like I was watching figure skating, everything gliding, nothing touching the ground. Preston told the Northwestern graduation story again, and I noticed it had the same 3 beats as last time, the same pause, the same little joke about the rain on the quad, word for word, like a song he'd learned. Who tells a story about their own son the exact same way twice? Then, near the dessert table, Elaine touched Grant's sleeve and said, laughing at something, "Oh, Danny, stop. Danny." The room kept moving, but I didn't. Grant's hand tightened around his glass, just for a breath, knuckles pale. And then he laughed too and said his mother had called him that when he was small. Some private family joke. Wasn't she incorrigible? Elaine's eyes did a strange thing while he said it. They went to him first, quick, like a student checking the teacher's face before answering. I know that glance. I see it in family meetings when the son who pays for the facility corrects the daughter who actually visits. It's the glance of someone checking the script. Grant had told me 100 times that nobody in his family used nicknames, that he'd been Grant even in the crib. On the cab ride home he was funny and warm and utterly normal, and I sat beside him with my hand in his, thinking one thought on a loop. Her eyes went to him first. 3 weeks after the gala I was on a night shift, 2 in the morning, the hour when the building itself seems to breathe slower. I'd stepped into the family lounge to make coffee for a patient's daughter who couldn't stop shaking, and the television up in the corner was murmuring to an empty room. A commercial came on for one of those regional insurance companies, the kind with a jingle and a toll-free number. Soft focus. A silver-haired grandfather in a canvas jacket, teaching a little boy to fish off a dock, promising that some things should last for generations. I looked up with the coffee pot in my hand and the whole world went narrow, like a hallway. The grandfather was Preston Caldwell. Not a resemblance. Him. The pocket-square posture, the warm crinkle at the eyes he'd aimed at me across 2 separate ballrooms, the exact voice that had called my mother-in-law to be his bride of 40 years. I stood there so long the coffee burned. Then I did what any of you would have done. I grabbed my phone with my pulse banging in my ears and typed the insurance company's name into the search bar, misspelling it twice, and found the ad on their website, and under it, a production credit page. And on that page, a cast list. The grandfather was played by a Chicago-area actor named Gerald Fisk. Gerald Fisk. Available for commercial, corporate, and private event work, it said, through his talent page. Private event work. I carried the coffee to the shaking daughter, and I held her hand, and I said all the right nurse things while somewhere behind my sternum a door I had been holding shut for months swung wide open. My future father-in-law was selling term life insurance at 2 in the morning. And his name, apparently, had never been Caldwell at all. I did not confront Grant. I want credit for that, because every cell in my body wanted to shake him awake and hold the phone to his face. But nursing teaches you a rule that has saved me twice in my life. You don't pull the needle until you've found the vein. If I was wrong, I'd be the woman who accused her fiancé's dying-ish mother of being a hired act. If I was right, then the man I lived with had resources and nerve I hadn't begun to map. And he would smooth this over the way he smoothed everything, and I would never see the bottom of it. So for 4 days I worked the problem in the margins of my shifts, quiet as a chart audit. Gerald Fisk's actor page listed decades of credits, community theater, industrial training videos, and a specialty line that made my skin prickle, discrete roles for corporate and private engagements. The woman I knew as Elaine matched a headshot on the same agency's roster, a lovely retired actress out of Evanston with a different name entirely. The Caldwell Art Consultancy in Naples had a one-page website, no address, no gallery, no tax trail my modest skills could find, just elegant gray font, and the domain had been registered the same year Grant moved to Chicago. And the man himself, my catalog man, simply did not exist past a certain depth. No Grant Caldwell in the Northwestern Alumni Directory. No childhood address, no obituary mentions, no dusty swim team result from some summer league, and everybody has a dusty swim team result. His paper trail started 11 years ago, complete and confident, like a highway that begins in the middle of a field. A man with no past has one somewhere. I was done wondering whether it existed. Now I needed to know where it was buried. I booked Gerald Fisk through his talent page, using my real name, saying I wanted to discuss an event role. We met at a coffee shop in Andersonville on my day off. In person, he was smaller than his ballroom self, a working actor in a cardigan. And when I sat down and slid my engagement photo across the table instead of a job offer, he looked at it for a long moment and aged about 5 years. I wondered, he said, if this day was coming. He was careful, I'll give him that. He didn't gossip. He'd been hired through an event agency. Everything by the book. A character brief thicker than most film scripts, he said. Family history, allergies, anecdotes, the rain on the quad. The rule was never stay longer than an hour. Never accept a private meal. Never improvise biography. I've played a lot of fathers, he told me, turning his cup in circles. Weddings, funerals, board dinners. It's more common than you'd ever want to know. But I've never had a client keep the same father running for years. Most people need a dad for one afternoon. That young man built himself a permanent one. I asked if he knew Grant's real name. He was quiet for a while, deciding something about himself. And I watched him decide it. Then he said the first year, before everything got routed through the agency, the retainer checks had come from a personal account, drawn on some little bank out of Michigan, and the name printed on them wasn't Caldwell. He remembered it because of a Polish deli near his apartment. Same name on the awning. He'd smiled at the coincidence every time he cashed one. Novak, he said. D. Novak. He looked at my ring, then at me, gently, like a man delivering test results. Honey, I just play the part. You're the one marrying the production. That night, Grant slept the untroubled sleep of a man whose systems were all running normally, and I sat out on the balcony with my phone and a blanket and typed Daniel Novak into the search bar, because Danny had never left my head since the gala. It's a common name. I scrolled through athletes and realtors and a retired police captain, adding words like a woman picking a lock by feel. Danny, Daniel Ray, Daniel Novak, Michigan. I tried finally, because of Gerald's little bank, and the fourth result stopped my breathing. It was an obituary from a Saginaw funeral home, 7 years old. Helen Novak, age 84, lifelong parishioner, famous for her pierogi at the church festival, preceded in death by her husband, survived by her son Raymond and his wife Carol, and by her beloved grandson Daniel. There was a photograph of Helen outside a small brick church, and she had Grant's jawline. Or rather, he had hers. I sat with the wind coming off the lake and did the arithmetic no one had asked me to do. His grandmother. 7 years ago he was already Grant Caldwell of Chicago, already mine, and I searched my memory for that spring and found it instantly, a wine tasting in Napa he'd planned for my birthday. No shadow on him at all, not one. The woman who taught him to fish, or bake, or pray, or whatever she taught him, went into the ground with his name in her obituary, and he tasted 17 kinds of Cabernet and smiled at me over every glass. An online directory gave me the rest in 30 seconds. R&C Novak, an address on Hazelwood Street, Saginaw, Michigan. I looked through the glass at my sleeping fiancé for a long time. Then I texted Nadia, my closest friend on the ward. Can you take my Saturday? I need to swap. I told Grant I was covering Nadia's shift, the first outright lie of my adult life to a man I loved, and it fit in my mouth so easily it frightened me. I left at 6 in the morning with coffee and a printed map like it was a mission, because my hands wanted a paper thing to hold. If you've never driven into Saginaw, I'll tell you what it looks like. You come off the interstate into streets that were built proud, little bungalows with real porches, and then you pass the plants, or what's left of them. Whole city blocks of factory behind chain link, windows the color of dishwater, parking lots big enough for thousands of cars holding maybe 40. My dad worked machines his whole life, so I know what those lots used to sound like at shift change. It's a specific kind of quiet they have now. Hazelwood Street was 5 minutes past the fences, and the house was pale yellow, small, and cared for in a way money can't fake. Fresh paint on the porch rails, tomato stakes in the side yard, gutters cleaned by hand. And the porch light was on. 11 o'clock on a bright Saturday morning, sun everywhere, and that one bulb burning away over the front steps like a candle in a church. I sat in the car across the street for probably 10 minutes, rehearsing openings the way I rehearse telling a family bad news, and every version sounded insane. Then the front door opened, and a woman came out with a watering can, 60s, soft gray perm, wiping one hand on her apron. She had Grant's eyes. She had his exact eyes, and his way of tilting the head, on a face that had done its worrying honestly. I was out of the car before I decided to be. She watched me come up the walk the way women like her watch strangers, kindly, braced. I said I was sorry to bother her, and was she Daniel's mother? The watering can stopped mid-pour. Is he alive? She said. That was her first question. Is he alive? Her name was Carol. She sat me at a kitchen table with a wipe-clean checkered cloth and put out coffee and a plate of windmill cookies before she would let me say one more word, because there are women in this country who cannot receive news without feeding you first, and my own mother is one of them. Her husband came in from the garage when she called, drying his hands on a rag. Ray Novak was a tall man gone careful in the joints, and when he shook my hand, I felt the story of his working life in it. Scar tissue laid smooth and shiny across the knuckles, 2 nails that had grown back wrong. 30 years pouring metal at the plant I'd learn, until the buyout came the same year the country's wheels came off, and the plant gates closed behind him for good. I put my hands around the coffee cup, and told them the truth in the plainest order I could manage. My name is Paige. I live in Chicago. I'm engaged to your son. He's healthy, he's successful, and the wedding is in August. Carol gripped the edge of the table and I watched 11 years of terror leave her body all at once, and what rushed in behind it wasn't joy. It was grief, with nowhere to put itself. She asked, was he sick? Was he in trouble? Was he in debt to someone? Because why else? And I understood she'd spent a decade building explanations with mercy in them, and I had just burned everyone. Ray stood by the counter, not sitting, one hand flat on the laminate like he was steadying it, and asked no questions at all. It was Carol who finally said it, in a voice worn down to the boards, while her thumb moved back and forth across the tablecloth as if soothing it. He didn't die, honey, he just buried us instead. Then she stood up, pressed her apron down twice and said there was something I ought to see. She led me down a short hallway lined with school photos, and there he was, year after year, a gap-toothed boy becoming a lanky teenager, Daniel Ray Novak in a mullet phase. Absolutely nobody in Lincoln Park would survive learning about. His bedroom was kept like a room in a museum with a staff of 1, baseball trophies dusted weekly, a certificate for a state science fair, a photograph of the 3 of them outside the plant gates on the day Ray got his 30-year pin, Danny maybe 17, his father's scarred hand proud on his shoulder, everybody squinting into the sun like happiness was too bright to look at directly. And on the closet shelf, a shoebox. Carol set it on the bed like it was a sleeping baby. Inside, standing in a neat row, were birthday cards. One for every year he'd been gone, addressed in her looping hand to Daniel Novak at an apartment in East Lansing, the last address they'd ever had for him, and every single one wore the same red stamp. Return to sender. A row of them, year after year. She'd kept buying them anyway, she said, because the day she didn't buy one would mean something she wasn't willing to let it mean. At the back of the box was this year's card, bought, signed, sealed, and not stamped, because there was nowhere left on earth to send it. She put it in my hands. On the front was a cardinal on a snowy branch, because he'd loved cardinals as a boy, and inside she'd written the same thing she'd apparently written every year. We are not angry. The door is not locked. Love, Mom and Dad. Keep it, Carol said. If there ever comes a day he's ready. And Ray, from the doorway, asked me the only question he asked all afternoon. Is he happy? Neither of them ever asked if he was rich. We talked until late afternoon, and I'll keep most of it for them. But you should know the shape of the story. Danny left for college the year the plant took its buyouts. A scholarship kid, the first Novak ever to go. First he came home less, then he called less, and each step had a reason stapled to it. Exams, internships, a job that owned his weekends. The last time they saw him in person was a Thanksgiving 11.5 years back, when he sat in this kitchen in a new gray coat, checking his phone like it was an IV line, and told his father gently that people out there judged you by where you came from, and it was just easier to keep worlds separate. Within a year his number was disconnected. The letters started coming back. They tried, in their way. They called the old school friends, wrote to the last employer they knew about. Ray refused to hire the kind of stranger who finds people for money, and when he told me why, he looked at his hands. A man shouldn't have to be tracked down and made to claim you. Either you're his people, or you're not. They never once thought to search for a rich man named Caldwell, because why on earth would they? When I got up to leave, Carol held me the way you hold family, and Ray walked me to my car through the long gold light. At the curb he stopped and nodded back at the house, at that one stubborn bulb burning over the steps in broad daylight. It went on the night of that last Thanksgiving, he said, and it had not been switched off since, not once in 11 years, through every power bill that mattered on a pension. He shook my hand with that ruined, gentle hand of his and said, "Tell him the porch light's still on." I cried for the first hour of the drive home, and I don't cry easy. Ask anyone on my ward. If you're listening to this and somebody's child has gone quiet on you, leave a comment below. I promise I read them. And subscribe, because what Grant did 3 days later took my choice and made it for me. Here's what nobody tells you about learning a secret this size. You don't get to react. I came home at 10 that night to warm lamps and a man in a pressed t-shirt, which is a real thing he owns, several of them. And he asked how my shift went. And I said, "Long." And he kissed my head and poured me wine, and I drank it 3 feet from the cardinal card hidden in my work bag. For days I lived like a woman carrying a tray of full glasses across a moving train. I watched him now with the sound off, and the performance was everywhere once you knew. The accent that flattened by one careful notch on certain calls. The tiny pause, half a second, a metronome tick, before any answer about the past. The way he was at his warmest right after one of those pauses, warmth deployed like a bandage. Once, over dinner, I floated a test I'd been carrying all day, casual as a napkin. I said a patient's family this week was from Michigan, and did he ever miss it? He looked up. I had never told him any patient was from Michigan, and he had never told me he was. The half-second stretched into a full one, the longest unscripted silence I'd witnessed in 5 years. And then he smiled and said, "I must be tired." He'd never lived in Michigan. His people were Connecticut going back forever. Then he cleared my plate before I'd finished, which he had never once done, and stood at the sink with the water running longer than any 2 dishes require. The best performer in the room had just noticed the audience holding a program from a different show. Before the party makes sense, you have to know what that night was worth to him. Grant's firm had an opening at the partner level, the first in 6 years, and the man who held the keys was Whitman Emerson, called Whit, 70-ish, silver, the kind of man who has never once carried his own luggage or his own doubt. Grant had been courting him all spring, golf, symphony tickets, opinions on wine borrowed from magazines. Whit, Grant told me over breakfast, believed capital was a family matter, that you handed serious money only to men from serious houses, men with what he called a long driveway behind them. He quoted that phrase with a little reverence that turned my stomach now, and so our engagement party, the party I had planned and my modest savings were partly paying for, underwent a quiet renovation. The guest list grew fins. Suddenly, it was at the university club. Suddenly, there were cigars ordered. And one evening Grant looked up from his laptop and delivered the line he'd clearly been polishing. Good news. His parents would fly in for the engagement party. Mother rallies for the big occasions, he said, fondly. The fiction now fully automated. I said that was wonderful. I actually said the word wonderful, and I sipped my tea while my whole rib cage burned, because I finally saw the mechanic's hole. His parents could not do a wedding, all those unscripted hours, my questioning family at close range, but a 2-hour cocktail party with a hard exit performed for the one audience that mattered, Whit Emerson. That they could do. He wasn't hiding his family from my parents at all anymore. He was booking the cast. I had to tell someone or start talking to the break room microwave, so I told Nadia, my ward sister in every way that counts, over pancakes after a night shift. I kept the names out of it and the state vague, but I gave her the spine, the actors, the buried parents, the porch light, and she set down her fork halfway through and didn't pick it up again. Then she asked the question I needed and did not want. So what's the plan, Paige? Are you throwing an engagement party or a trial? I opened my mouth to say trial was ridiculous, and couldn't, because some part of me had been drafting exactly that, a courtroom with past appetizers. There's a version of this story where I hire nobody, and hack nothing, and simply produce the shoebox at the right moment like a lawyer, and let the room do my screaming for me, and I want you to know I tasted that version, and it tasted like him. That's the thing Nadia handed me with her fork down. Scheming was his language. If I won by outstaging the stage manager, I'd walk out of the wreckage fluent in it. I work with dying people. Do you know what they regret? Nobody has ever gripped my wrist at 3 a.m. and whispered that they wished they'd humiliated someone more thoroughly. They regret the years the truth sat in a drawer. So no trap, I decided. Right there, over cold pancakes. Whatever I did would be done by daylight, through the front door. And he would get the first choice, which is more than he ever gave his mother. That afternoon, I called Saginaw. Carol answered on the second ring, the way people answer who have spent years being ready for the phone. I asked how she'd feel about coming to Chicago in 3 weeks, to an engagement party, as my guests, my honored guests, and the line went so quiet I could hear their kitchen clock. I told her the truth about what the evening was, and I made her the only promise I've ever made with my whole spine. Your son will get the chance to do the right thing himself, first. Before anything. I heard her hand cover the receiver, and the muffled shape of a conversation, and then Ray's voice came on, level as a spirit gauge. We don't go where we're not invited. I said, you are invited, Mr. Novak. I'm inviting you. It's my party, and my name is on it. He was silent a moment. Then he said something that told me everything about the next 30 years of my life, whoever I spent them with. I'll come to see my boy. But nobody kneels. You understand me? Not him to us. Not us to anybody in that room. I said I understood. And then Carol was back, breathless, already 3 steps ahead, asking, what does one wear? And I said, Carol, you wear whatever you'd wear to the church festival. And she laughed for the first time since I'd met her, a young laugh, and said in that case there was a blue dress she'd been saving for something, and never once in 11 years found the something. I booked their hotel that night with my own card. 2 queen beds. Lakeview. Some money you spend and feel poorer. This was the other kind. I need to tell you about the night before the party, because if I skip it you'll think this was easy, and stories where it's easy are lies. Grant fell asleep a little after midnight with his reading glasses still on, some acquisitions brief rising and falling on his chest, and I sat on the edge of the bed in the dark and looked at him for a long time. The lamplight caught the boy in him. It always had. That particular smoothness at the temple, and I thought about a kid squinting into the sun outside the plant gates with his dad's scarred hand on his shoulder, and I looked for that kid in this face and could half find him, and the half was the hard part. I'm not going to pretend I didn't waver. I sat there and ran the other life like a film. Wake up tomorrow, say nothing, stand beside him under the flowers in August, love him strictly inside the set he'd built, grow old as the only member of the audience never allowed backstage. People do it. I've held the hands of women who did it, at the very end. And I've heard what it costs. Usually around 3 a.m, usually in a whisper, to a nurse. Because the husband still can't be told. He just buried us instead, Carol said in my head, in that worn floorboard voice. I took off his glasses gently and set the brief on the nightstand. Wife things, Done maybe for the last time. And then I went to the closet and slid the cardinal card into the little beaded bag I'd carry to the party. I didn't know yet exactly what I'd do, but the card was coming. The University Club on a June evening is a cathedral built by Banks, walnut paneling 2 stories up, chandeliers like frozen fireworks, a string trio playing money-flavored Vivaldi, 80 guests. His column of the ledger, mostly, the firm, the club, 3 men who owned buildings, and Whit Emerson holding court by the windows with a scotch, people orbiting him at the exact distance you'd keep from a fire. My column arrived at 7 sharp because my people are never late. Dad in his one navy suit, freshly pressed, Mom in florals with her purse held in both hands, Nadia riding in behind them like a tugboat. And here is the moment I want on my headstone. I watched my parents cross that intimidating marble lobby, and I felt the old reflex reach for its clipboard, straighten his tie, coach her stories, manage, and for the first time in my life, I set it down. I didn't brief them. Whatever this room got tonight, it would get us as we came. Dad hugged me and said quietly, "Some barn," and I laughed too loud for the acoustics and loved him past the reach of language. Across the floor, Preston and Elaine made their entrance on schedule, silver and pearls, professionally radiant, and Grant steered them straight toward Whit like a man docking a yacht. I watched the introductions land, watched Whit actually warm, at Preston's polished nonsense, and I felt strangely calm, the calm I get in codes, when the worst is finally in the room and there's nothing left to dread but plenty to do. At 7:40, a young man from the front desk touched my elbow. My 2 guests had arrived, he said. They were waiting upstairs in the reading room. The reading room at the University Club is the kind of place that makes you lower your voice even when it's empty. Green lamps, leather spines, a balcony rail overlooking the main hall. Ray stood by the window in a charcoal suit that had a good 20 years on it, pressed to a razor edge. You could tell the ironing had been an event in itself. His church shoes holding a soldier's shine. Carol wore the blue dress. Saved 11 years for a something, and here was the something. And I want the record to show she was beautiful in it. She was also terrified. She stood gripping her little cream purse with both hands the way my mother does, the exact same grip, 2 women who'd never met holding onto the same railing, and she'd gone to the balcony edge, and she was looking down. I followed her eyes and my chest pulled tight. Below us, framed perfectly between 2 chandeliers, Grant was laughing at something the hired version of his father had said. Head back, hand on Preston's shoulder, the sun performing sunhood, glossy and warm, for a man being paid by the hour. Carol watched her child laugh with his bought father, the first sight of him in 11 years, and she made no sound at all. It was Ray who moved, crossing to her, and setting that scarred hand between her shoulder blades, steady as a beam. Neither of them said anything, and I'll go the rest of my life trying to unhear that particular silence. I stepped up beside them and kept my promise. "Give me 30 minutes, I said. "He gets his chance first." Ray nodded once, eyes still on his son. "Go on then," he said. And I went down to get Grant. I found my fiancé mid-anecdote and did the thing wives-to-be are allowed to do. I slipped a hand into the crook of his elbow, apologized to the circle with a smile, and told him the photographer needed us upstairs. Just 5 minutes. He came easily. He was having the night of his life. On the stairs he squeezed my hand and whispered that Whit had asked to have lunch next week. Lunch? Paige. And his face was so lit and boyish that for 2 steps I nearly lost my nerve. Then we were in the library, a small private one behind the reading room, all lamplight and old maps, and I closed the door. And there was no photographer. And he understood there was no photographer in about a second and a half, because whatever else he has never been slow. "Paige, what is this?" I didn't answer with a speech. I'd promised myself, no speeches. Speeches are performances, and this family was full. I opened the beaded bag, took out the cardinal card, unstamped, unmailed, 11 years of return to sender standing invisibly behind it, and set it on the leather desktop between us, Redbird facing him. "Open it, Danny." The name did the work a paragraph couldn't. I watched it go through him like current. The posture first, then the jaw, then something behind the eyes shutting and opening in a new configuration, the fastest costume change of his career, ending in a face I'd honestly never met. Not the catalog man. Someone leaner and older and cornered. He didn't touch the card. He looked at it the way you look at a syringe someone's laid out for you, and then he asked, very quietly, a question that told me everything he could no longer deny. When did she give you that? She. Not who. Not what is this. She. I told him the whole chain in under 2 minutes, flat, chronological, a nurse giving handoff. The commercial at 2 a.m, Gerald Fisk's coffee cup turning in circles, a funeral home page with his grandmother's face on it, a kitchen on Hazelwood Street with a checkered cloth. His mother's first question, is he alive? The porch light. He stood absolutely still through it, hands at his sides, and the only tell was his breathing, which had gone shallow and quick, like a man 3 flights past his conditioning. Then I laid out the terms. And here I need you to slow down and hear what they were, because everything I am hangs on this paragraph. I said, your mother and father are 40 feet from this door in the reading room, dressed for a party. In 30 minutes I'm walking down those stairs and I will be standing next to them. What happens before that is yours. You can walk in there, hold your mother and bring your parents downstairs yourself tonight, as who they are, and I will stand beside you while you do it. All night, no matter what it costs you in that room. Or you can decline. And then I'll bring them down myself, as my honored guests, and I will tell no lies for you, and I will make no scene beyond the truth. There is no third option where they wait in a hotel like a problem. Then I did the part I'd rehearsed in the mirror, because I owed him a clean wound, and I said, and Grant, hear this part. The wedding is over either way. That ended when I learned Gerald bills hourly. This isn't a negotiation for me. It's your one chance to walk through a door your mother has kept unlocked for 11 years. Silence. A long one. And then Grant Caldwell did the single worst thing available to him. He laughed, softly, and started explaining. I'll give him this much. What came out of him for the next few minutes was the first true thing I'd heard in 5 years, and it was terrible to watch, like a wall finally letting the water through. Sophomore year, he said, Michigan State. He'd brought his roommate home for a weekend, a kid from a lake house in Grosse Pointe. His dad had come to dinner straight off a double, scrubbed to the elbow the way he always scrubbed, and there was still shadow in the creases of those hands. There is always shadow in a foundry man's hands, and the roommate had noticed, and been charming about it, and gone back to campus, and told everyone. The nickname stuck for 2 years. Shop rat. He said it looking past me at the map cabinet, and his voice at that moment had Saginaw in it, flat and northern, the accent finally home. Then the firm's first mentor, some polished ghoul long retired, who'd looked over his resume, the plant scholarships, the state fair, and said, kindly, that it was an admirable story he should never tell again, because nobody hands serious money to a shop rat from Saginaw. So I stopped being him, Grant said. You want it to be complicated, Paige, but it was a business decision. It was the price. And I said, quiet as a pulse check, your mother thinks the price was her. That's when the pleading started, and it was worse than the laughing. Send them home, he said, gently, reasonably. Tonight was 18 months of work. Wit was finally in the room. We'd fix the family thing quietly, in stages, therapy. A trip to Michigan in the fall. He'd already half planned it, he said. He'd tell me everything from now on. He reached for my hands and I let him hold them, and it changed nothing, and I told him so with the only words I'd carried since a kitchen in Saginaw. Your mom says you didn't die, you just buried them. You told me once your family wouldn't know what to do in a room like that, and you were right, Grant. It's you. It was always you. Then I picked up the card, left the ring on the desk blotter, and opened the door. Ray and Carol were standing when I came into the reading room, and they read my face the way parents read weather. I said, he needs a minute and we're not waiting on it. Walk down with me. Carol looked at the stairs, then at Ray, and Ray straightened his 20-year-old jacket with 2 hands, offered his wife his arm like it was Easter Sunday, and said, we've waited 11 years. We're done waiting in upstairs rooms. We came down the grand staircase together, the 3 of us. Slow, because Carol's knees are honest and marble is marble. Rooms notice things. Don't let anyone tell you they don't. By the last step, the string trio was playing to half the volume of before, conversations dropping in rings outward the way water goes still, and 80 faces had begun arranging themselves toward the strangers, the beautiful old man with the ruined hands and the woman in her blue dress. I took a glass from a passing tray and a spoon, and I did not have to chime it more than once. I found the innkeeper's voice. The one I use in family meetings when the news is hard, and the family deserves it anyway. Low, clear, unhurried. Thank you all for being here tonight. Before the toasts, I have the honor of introducing two guests. I felt the room lean. This is Raymond Novak, and his wife, Carol, of Saginaw, Michigan. Ray poured metal for General Motors for 30 years. Carol fed half the school children in Saginaw County. They are Grant's mother and father. One beat of silence. Total, cathedral silence. They made him. Everything else in this room tonight is catering. And then, because I had promised a man at a curb, I turned so I could see the top of the stairs where my fiancé stood frozen halfway down, and I said, "Grant, the porch light is still on." What broke first was not the crowd. It was Gerald Fisk. He set down his glass, buttoned his jacket like a man leaving the stage door, gave me a small nod I will keep forever, and steered his weeping pearl-draped colleague toward the coat room, and their exit told the room everything my toast had declined to say. Whit Emerson's face did something slow and geological. And Carol, my Carol, did the only unscripted thing left in the building. She crossed the marble floor to her son and put her arms around him. 11 years, in front of everyone. His arms stayed at his sides, both of them. That was the whole verdict, and every soul in the room heard it. I collected my parents with a look, the way you can when you've been somebody's daughter for 33 years, and I told the room, pleasantly, that the party was paid through 11 and they should absolutely stay for the short ribs. Then I walked out of the university club with my mother, my father Nadia, and the Novaks, past the doorman into the warm June dark, and nobody chased us. Because in that world, nobody runs after anything in public. 4 blocks north there's a diner that's been open since before any of us were born. Vinyl booths, pie under glass domes. We took the big corner booth. And I want you to see what I saw. Because this is the frame I keep. Within 10 minutes, Ray Novak and my dad were deep into a warm argument about small block engines, interrupting each other like brothers, 2 pairs of ruined hands drawing carburetors in the air. Carol and my mom started in on pie crust and never surfaced, and somewhere in there my mother took Carol's hand across the table, over the syrup caddy, and just held it. No words attached. And Carol let her. Nadia ordered disgracefully well for one human. I sat in the middle of it with a naked place on my finger where a ring had been for 8 months, and I'm not going to pretend that didn't ache. It ached like a drawn tooth, wrong and right at the same time. My phone buzzed against the tabletop and kept buzzing. His name. Again and again. I turned it face down next to the syrup and asked Carol to pass the cream. The unglamorous accounting, because you deserve it. I moved out that week, into Nadia's spare room, my life in the same 11 boxes it had arrived in, which felt like a grade I'd been given. I lost the venue deposit, most of it anyway, and the dress hangs in a garment bag at my mother's house, where she refuses to let me sell it, for reasons she won't say out loud. Grant sent one long message a few days later. It was immaculate. It mentioned optics twice and timelines once. It proposed a communications approach regarding the party. And in all those beautifully carpentered sentences, the word sorry appeared only with company. Sorry you had to. Sorry it unfolded. Sorry standing next to an excuse like a man who won't enter a room alone. I read it twice, and understood I'd already heard his real answer in a library. Word gets around a small city inside a big one. The partnership went quiet. I heard. Not with a bang. Just a lunch that never got rescheduled. A driveway that turned out shorter than advertised. The firm kept him. His world simply adjusted his valuation, the way that world does, silently, in the hallway, and somewhere in it there is doubtless a new young man with a perfect coat learning what gets handed to people like him and what never will. The machine didn't break. Machines like that don't. But it no longer ran on anyone I loved. The Novaks went home that Sunday, and Carol calls me every week now, Sunday evenings after church and before her programs, and we talk about her tomatoes and my patients and, carefully, about Danny, the way you talk about weather in farm country, with respect. In September, on my birthday, an envelope came to Nadia's place addressed in looping hand I recognized before I understood, and I stood in the hallway holding the first birthday card Carol Novak had successfully delivered to anybody in 11 years. No red stamp. No return to sender. Inside, under a cardinal on a snowy branch, she'd written, "You gave me back the truth. That's more than most mothers get." The door is not locked. Love, Mom and Dad. I sat down on the stairs and stayed there a while. And one more thing, because you'll want to know, and because I promised myself I'd tell it straight and not dress it up as more than it is. In October, on one of our Sundays, Carol mentioned, in a voice working hard at casual, that a car had parked across from the house the weekend before. Sat there almost an hour, she said. Gray, expensive-looking, Illinois plates. Nobody got out, nobody knocked. It drove off at dusk. Ray came out on the porch while she told me, she said, and stood there a minute, and then he checked the bulb over the steps, the way he does every night, and went back inside, and left it burning. I used to believe love needed a little editing to be safe, that you protected people by managing how they were seen. I know better now. The only love worth building a life on is the kind that can stand in any room exactly as it is. Scars showing, porch light on, nothing hired, nothing hidden, nobody waiting upstairs. That's my story. One late-night commercial, one shoebox of returned birthday cards, and one porch light that never went out. If this story reminded you of someone you've been hiding, or someone who's been hidden from you, take it as your sign and reach out today, while the reaching is easy. Share this video with somebody who needs it. Drop a comment below, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.